Blackmagic Pocket 6K. I've never done a review of it, and I don't even know why. But there were so many cameras coming out in 2020. The R5, R6, Sony a7S III, the Komodo. It kinda just slipped under the rug. And now, with so many new cameras out there, does the Blackmagic Pocket 6K even have a place in the market right now? Well, after shooting a couple commercials, a fitness video, a fashion video, as well as a short film with it, in this video I will give you my opinion on it, but more on that after the intro. So I guess this isn't really your typical in-depth review of the camera, but more of an opinionated video after using the camera in a commercial as well as YouTube capacity. And well, I give you my take on if I think it's still worth buying in 2021, and if so, whom for. So let's start with the overall body, and that is probably the most talked about thing of the camera anyway. When I owned the camera, rigging out the camera, the body, the feel, the way you shoot with it was probably my biggest drawback of the camera. It was such a pain in the ass to add all that stuff to it because you couldn't even run it with internal batteries, and putting V-mount batteries or NPF battery solutions on it really weren't elegant, and nothing really felt really right, and it always had this kind of Frankenstein feel to it. I would have even been fine by just using a bunch of Canon batteries if the communication between the camera and the batteries were a little bit better, but sometimes it shut off at 30% and sometimes it ran down to 1%, and overall for me in a professional capacity that was just unacceptable. So me personally, I opted for an NPF battery solution, which worked fine, but it just wasn't enjoyable of shooting with it because you couldn't really tell how much battery you have left, and the overall balance of the rig just really didn't feel right, and I didn't really enjoy shooting with it as much as I do with basically any other camera that I owned or currently own. Another thing I really didn't enjoy about the camera was the missing infrared cut filter, and that kinda ties into the whole rigging in body situation. I shoot a lot in sunset and sunrise situations, so I'm always in between this range of 2 stops NDs and no NDs at all. And I shoot backlit as well as frontal lit with the sun, and it always was a pain in the ass with the missing infrared cut filter because my results were oftentimes all over the place. There were also some other minor inconveniences. When attaching an external monitor to it, you could easily just do everything just with the buttons on the camera, but you couldn't really see what you're doing. If you wanted to change ISO or shutter, you couldn't really see anything on the display what you're actually adjusting now. So it oftentimes happened that I thought I was adjusting my ISO, but in reality I was adjusting my shutter. So I did have to look at the back screen, and then that kind of defeats the purpose of having an external screen anyway. Obviously, there's also a lot of things that I do like about the design of the Blackmagic Pocket 6K. The menu, for example, is the best that I've ever seen. It has so many options, it's intuitive, and everything is right where you want it to be. The amount of options you have when choosing what you want to have displayed on your external display and what you don't want to have displayed is an absolute bliss to work with. The focus peaking on the BMP-CC 6K is the best that I have ever seen in any kind of camera, and the fact that you can display it on the external screen is also amazing. The fact that you have so many different memory card options like CFast, SD cards or external SSDs over USB-C is also something that I'm missing on other cameras. Me personally, I like to shoot internally and I don't really like to mess around with external SSDs, but having the option is definitely a really cool thing. Also, the Bluetooth app that comes with the Blackmagic Pocket 6K is the best that I've ever seen on any camera too. My Canon C300 Mark III doesn't even have an app at all or any way to control it wirelessly without spending more money. So having the option to adjust your settings or even just snapping the autofocus in place is a really cool feature. Another thing that is really welcomed on the body of the Blackmagic Pocket 6K is that it does feature a external timecode in. The one thing that I really don't like about it is that you only have an HDMI port, no SDI port. I love using SDI, especially with wireless transmitters or when doing live streams. I actually had a job just a couple weeks ago where SDI was required because we did a multi-camera live stream with SDI outs, and basically the broadcasting team only accepted SDIs, and no HDMI connection. So overall, it is a somewhat professional camera, but the missing SDI port really bugs me. Alright, so now after weeks of searching and trial and error, I actually found a rig that I was comfortable with. And I made a full video about this, and I will link this up here so you can check this out later if you want to. So that brings me to one of the most important parts, and that is the image quality. And I have to say, when I first used the camera, I was completely blown away by the image quality. This is the sharpest camera that I have ever seen. But not only is it sharp, but it's kind of organic. And that is a combination that you rarely find on any kind of camera. Either it looks really digital sharpened, or it's really soft and cinematic. But the Blackmagic Pocket 6K kind of combines the best of both worlds. The dynamic range is alright, I guess. It sits right between a Canon R5 and a Sony a7S III, so right in the middle, and that is usually good enough for me. The fact that it shoots B-RAW as well as ProRes is also really nice, and the fact that you have so many different compression options is something that I miss on basically any other camera that I own or have owned in the past. And although I really like the colors coming out of the Blackmagic Pocket 6K, and I really do like the flat film look that it comes with, I found it a little bit inconsistent. On certain shots I got really amazing results and I was completely blown away, but when I turned the camera 90 degrees or on another day another shoot, I kind of felt like I couldn't really get the results out of the camera that I was used to with other cameras. On my Canon C300 Mark III, for example, it's always spot on. With the Blackmagic Pocket 6K, it was kind of a hit and miss, and sometimes I got gorgeous colors and I didn't really have to do too much in post-productions, and sometimes I spent hours trying to get the footage to look what I wanted to look like. And speaking of color grading, every shot that you see here in this video that I shot on the Blackmagic Pocket 6K is color graded with one of our two LUT packs for the Blackmagic Pocket 6K. And if you want to check them out, the link is in the description below. And if you use the code BMPCC6K, you can get 10% off your purchase. Another thing that I noticed about the image quality was the noise. It does feature dual native ISO, but I found whenever you had to raise the ISO a little bit and were not point on to either 3200 or ISO 400, the results really weren't great, especially if you didn't have any external lighting and you just had to run and gun and deal with the situation at hand. I got a lot of noisy footage and I had to use a lot of neat video in post. But again, when you do, the footage still looks absolutely amazing. So one thing I can totally say about the Blackmagic is that I'm really satisfied with the image quality overall, especially coming from a $2,000 camera. Before I start talking about my last topic, I have to put out a really big disclaimer. I only had the camera for about 2 to 3 months. And in this time, I had absolutely no issues with this camera whatsoever. But I've also been a member of a Blackmagic Pocket 6K and 4K group for the longest time now, and I've seen a lot of issues with this camera. Fried HDMI ports, corrupt footage, something not working, the camera not being able to turn on, and so on and so forth. Again, in the limited time that I have used the camera, I didn't have any issues, but I heard so many bad stories about the Blackmagic Pocket 6K. And for the jobs that I do, I really can't afford my camera not working. I do some high sensible documentary work, shots that you just can't repeat. And overall, I just want a camera that I can totally and 100% rely on. Again, my Blackmagic Pocket 6K didn't fail on me, but I read so many horror stories about mold on the sensor and corrupt footage and so on and so forth. So overall, I really wanted to go a way that I was comfortable with and went for the Canon C300 Mark III because I've been shooting on Canon for over a decade now and I never had any issues with any of my cameras and I could always totally rely on them. And with the Blackmagic Pocket 6K, I really wasn't that sure about it. Another thing that kind of ultimately led to me not keeping the Blackmagic Pocket 6K and going for a Canon C300 Mark III and an R5 combo was the missing autofocus. When I shoot handheld, I shoot 100% manual focus, but whenever I shoot on a gimbal, I rarely have a focus puller. Of course, you can just stay the same distance, open up your aperture, but for me, those aren't really satisfying solutions when working with a gimbal. Yes, you can attach a follow focus and then just trying to adjust the focus this way, but this is always a hassle, and having autofocus on a small camera that you can use on a gimbal is such a blessing. So when shooting with the R5 on the DJI RS2 or even with the Canon C300 Mark III for just simple shots where you just want to keep your actor's face or the lead singer of a band in focus, it's really easy. And I even shot a commercial on the R5 entirely on a gimbal with really complex movements where I was just focusing from one person to the other, and the autofocus worked flawlessly. And not having that option on the Blackmagic Pocket 6K always had me dreading to use a gimbal at all. Granted, I rarely use a gimbal, and I only use a gimbal when the footage demands for it, but when it does, I really do want to have an easy solution and not having to worry about my shot not being in focus all the time. So after all, I did sell my Blackmagic Pocket 6K and went with the C300 and R5 combo. And why did I do that? Ultimately, it was a mixture of several reasons. Number one was the entire rigging setup. I just didn't enjoy shooting with the camera, and the thing that I hated the most was definitely the battery solution, but also the missing infrared cut filter and the whole ND filter situation was also something I really didn't enjoy. When shooting on my Canon C300 or even my EOS R5, I just enjoy it more. I don't have to worry about battery life, it's just better balanced, and overall I don't really have to worry about anything. I can strip it down, it's more modular, and I can really build it out. With the Blackmagic Pocket 6K, I felt like I was always a little boxed in, because as soon as I started to strip it down, I was having issues with the battery or other stuff. So overall, I really do prefer shooting on my Canon cameras. Like I already said, the missing autofocus was also a problem, although I shoot manually about 90% of the times. The 10% where I don't shoot manually, the Blackmagic just wasn't right for me. And since Belle is also using my equipment for her line of work, and she basically shoots on a gimbal 95% of the time, the Blackmagic Pocket 6K was definitely not an option for her either. And then the last drop in the bucket was the uncertainty about the reliability in the customer service. With my Canon professional service team, I have absolutely no problems. I get a new camera like this when my camera breaks, and with Blackmagic I only heard bad stuff. Again, my Blackmagic didn't fail on me, but I only had it for about 2 to 3 months. But overall I didn't really want to take the risk. So, does that mean that I don't recommend the Blackmagic Pocket 6K? No, it does not, because now there's a missing factor here, and that is the price. The Blackmagic Pocket 6K costs $2,000. With a little bit of rigging, let it be $2,500, maybe even $3,000. My Canon C300 Mark III costs $12,000 without a memory card or without any kind of accessories. Of course, there's a lot of other competition, but everything else is also way more expensive. The R5 more than twice as much, the Red Komodo 3 times as much. So overall, in that kind of price bracket, I think the Blackmagic Pocket 6K is basically unbeatable. In somewhat of a controlled production environment, the Blackmagic Pocket 6K for its price point is absolutely unbeatable. The image quality is absolutely amazing and absolutely holds its own to cameras that are way more expensive. If you often find yourself in a run and gun situation where you need autofocus, maybe better battery life, then yeah, maybe the Blackmagic Pocket 6K isn't the best for you, and maybe just take a loss on the image quality but gain a little bit on the convenience factor and the reliability part when it comes to battery life. But that is basically up to you. But overall, I think in the price factor of around $2,500 to $3,000, there's hardly anything that rivals with it. And I think the R6 is the camera that is basically up the same price range. And I think the R6 is an amazing camera, as I already said in my review. But it really depends on what you do. If I were to shoot a lot of interviews and I know that my R6 might overheat where the Blackmagic Pocket 6K doesn't, I would definitely prefer the Blackmagic Pocket 6K. If I'm shooting a lot of short films, then I would also definitely pick the Blackmagic Pocket 6K just for its sheer image quality and its great files. But if I were to do a lot of running, gunning and a lot of gimbal work, I would probably prefer the R6. But that doesn't mean that the Blackmagic Pocket 6K isn't a really great camera and could be the right camera for you. So all of these factors is something for you to decide, and I think it all comes down to the budget in the end. So there you have it. This is my opinion on the Blackmagic Pocket 6K and if it's worth buying in 2021. And I will also do a review about the Portkeys LH5H monitor very soon. That pairs very nicely with the Blackmagic Pocket 6K. So subscribe if you want to see that review as well. Give this video a thumbs up to help the channel grow if you enjoyed what I was just talking about. And I hope to see you on the next one.